Friday episode of the Donovan Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and we have a heck of an episode for you today, like we do every Friday and every Wednesday. But today we have Glenn Herdling. Glenn was the assistant editor with Jim Salicrup on Spider-Man. He worked on Submariner, numerous other Marvel projects, worked for a while with Wizard Magazine, which is a big part of our collecting growing up, and also put out his own publications. And he is a manualist. What's a manualist? Is it a mutant ability? Is it a superpower? You will find out in this episode. So without further ado, here is Glenn Herdling joining us. Glenn, thank you so much for taking the time.
How you doing, Orrin?
I'm doing great.
Excellent.
So let's start at the very beginning. How did you first discover comics?
I was in third grade. I was down at the Jersey Shore. I think it was Long Beach Island at the time. And we had a really rainy week. It sucked for a kid. It was just, the worst type, couldn't go to the beach, couldn't do anything. So I was just stuck inside. So my mom went out and she went, food shopping. And she came home and she threw me this comic book. And it was the reprint of the old, it was called Marvel Superheroes, but it was a reprint of the old Tales to Astonish that had the Hulk and Submariner in it. And she
Mhm.
said, there you go. And so I was like, what is this? So I read the story and I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. And I remember at the end, the Hulk is going and he escapes from the law and everything. And then he goes, now I'm free, but free to do what? And I was like, oh, I want to know. I want to know. So I was hooked since then. Yeah.
That's
Then I
awesome.
discovered my good buddy Mike Lackey, who I got into the business later on. I met him that summer, and turns out there's this whole thing. There's a whole comic collection thing, and he and his brother had all these collections. I used to go to his house, and I'd be delving into all these like the history. I was like, wow. Turns out the Hulk that I was reading was a reprint, and that there's actually a more up to date Hulk. I was like, whoa.
Well, you know what I love about that story is one of my earliest comic things was in Stone Harbor.
Okay. Yeah.
So the Jersey Shore has that connection of
Yeah.
getting people in the comics when you can't go to the beach and the boardwalk's closed. Mom
Yeah.
and dad got to figure out something to do.
Exactly. And that's when it was just a newsstand, right? So
Yep. So how did you say to yourself, okay, maybe comics is a career or something I want to pursue as a business?
well, so it was so again, my friend Mike and Mike, when was very artistic, and we used to go. Then we used to create our own stories, and actually, we got out of home economics in our I guess it was eighth grade, and we created the Hobbit. We did a graphic novel interpretation of the adaptation, sorry, of the Hobbit,
Mhm.
and we would go to the library instead of going to home ec every day, and we put together these things. But Mike and I would also be doing other stories together, and we had these whole worlds that we had created. And so I just knew right from the start. I just, I loved writing. I loved, going into these things. And so when I had the opportunity, I went into at Bucknell University. There, my freshman year, I met artist Scott McDaniel. He was on my freshman hall. So I went, and so I had done a comic book about all my friends called the Ultra 10, and I gave all my friends superpowers and everything. So I was there on my desk, and I didn't know anyone yet. So I was coloring the issue, just I was going to put it up, so I, remember all my friends and everything. And then Scott's roommate came in and he said, goes, oh, you're into comics too? My roommate's a really good artist. I'm like, yeah, yeah, sure he is, right? So he came in and he brought all his stuff. I was like, oh my God. I just put away my stuff. I was embarrassed. I said, let me see. And I met Scott, and he and I then, forged a really good friendship through the 4 years we were there. We did the school newspaper cartoon, and we would go every Saturday. We'd take our bikes and ride into town and get up, get the latest X-Men and Hulk and everything else.
Mhm.
And then when I graduated, Scott was actually an engineer.
Mhm.
He majored in engineering, but I got a job at Marvel. What I did was I did an internship there.
Mhm.
And I called my senior year, and I called them up and I said, hey, you guys, do internships, because my grandmother had sent me this whole article about publishing companies. I was majoring in English. I wanted to go into publishing, and she had sent me these articles about how these publishing companies offer internships. I said, I wonder if Marvel does that. So I called, and they said, sure, come on in. And Bucknell had what they call a Jan plan, where you had the entire month of January off.
Mhm.
So I went and spoke to Lynn Cohen. Lynn Cohen was a Marvel. She hired me there as the intern. I was there for the entire month of January. I was Carl Potts's intern. And yeah, and then for the whole month there, and then I went back to school. People were saying, "Why'd you go back? Why'd you go? Why didn't you just Because they did really seem interested in me, and I said, I might have been able to get a job, but I stuck around. And I was like, no, I went through 3.5 years of college. I could not. I had to go for that last semester. So I came back, and then for the entire month, the entire summer, I was, in my parents' backyard, and I was, just hanging out, and I'd be, calling every week to check in. And, finally it got to be really, it was in September, and I remember it was like getting chilly. I said, wow, I can't go swimming anymore. So I called up Lynn. I said, Lynn, listen, I'll give me something, and I'll be a janitor. I'll be in the mailroom. She goes, all right, Glenn, let's see what we can do. Why don't you come on in this week? I came in. I was an editorial assistant for Jim Shooter, and then after that, Carl hired me back on for a little bit to fill in for his assistant who was out on sick leave. And then Jim Salicrup hired me for the Spider-Man titles, and I was with him for several years, and we had a blast.
I say, what a learning tree that is with Potts, Shooter, and Salicrup. I mean,
Yeah,
those
yeah.
heavy hitters. It's not like you want
Yeah,
to.
it was really heavy. It was funny. I just saw Carl this past weekend. We were doing a booze cruise together on the Hudson, and I was just we were like telling each other stories and reminding each other, oh, it's right, yeah, I forgot about no, I forgot about that. And but one of the things I actually just did recently did an interview about Black Wolf, one of the titles that I wrote when I was at Marvel, and we were talking about how there are times when editors, have to use and fill. There was a fill-in artist on Black Wolf at one point, and they were asking me what was my memory about that, and were you upset that I couldn't use Angel Medina on that? I said, listen, I'm the writer. I understand, as a writer, but also someone who's an editor. I understand that there are times you're going to need to fill in because of the deadline crunches. And I said, I think every editor has experienced. I said that, except probably Carl.
Well, let me ask you, because you just said you've had roles of writer and editor.
Mm-hmm.
As an editor, I know there are times you want to get the best out of who you're working with, but there are times you're going to have some difficult conversations with people. It could be very established people as well. What was
Mm-hmm.
your take and your technique in working with the talent?
Well, that's an interesting story. So there was one time, as a Hulk fan growing up, one of my the most favorite artists was Sal Buscema. I was just like, I would just hit no one to this day. I don't think anyone can draw the Hulk pissed off better than Sal can, right? You knew when the Hulk was mad, So, and so he was hired to do the Amazing Spider-Man annual, and then that was the wedding annual. And what happened was he came in, and we sent him all the references. I got all the, Peter Parker had his, where he was living, all these things that had to make sure, it was just right. So I sent all the references to Sal and everything. And Sal was like, all right, Glenn, babe, I'm on this. We're going to do this. I'm like, all right, Sal, this is great. And then there was some issues from on top, shall we say, where the editor-in-chief at the time came to me and said, Glenn, I want you to tell Sal that I want him to do it this way and not this way. I don't think it should be the way he's doing Thor. He's got to do the Spider-Man title more like the way his old. And so, as a newly hired assistant, I was like, I have to tell Sal how to draw.
Wow.
So that was a little uncomfortable. And Sal, bless his heart, he didn't do the annual, obviously, but
Right.
it was, and he sent me back. I was telling him, how embarrassed I was, and he goes, no, Glenn, babe, don't worry about it. This is fine, I understand. But the very next day, by Federal Express, got all the reference and everything in. It was a nice note from him saying, Glenn, I can't do this.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I would say, talk about trial by fire. I mean,
Yeah.
but you handle it well, and he wasn't offended by it.
No, he was great. I guess because I was so like, who am I to be telling Sal Buscema how to draw Spider-Man, right?
I want to talk about the different things you worked on, but could you have seen yourself just being a writer or just being an editor, or did you like kind of weaving in and out of it?
I liked both. I really did. I like the thing about editing. Again, you hear me mention Mike Lackey a lot about
Mhm.
this. Mike was in film school and he wanted to go into film, but he later came and begged me, Glenn, can you get me into comics? And I said, Mike, I thought you really liked the film thing. He goes, yeah, but with film, you have one idea and you work on it for several years. With comics, you can work on so many ideas at once. And, and that's what I really liked about editing is like, with writing, yeah, you can write a certain amount of things, but with editing, you can use your hands to so many more things. And I love working with creators. I love being able to, say, okay, I like that, but how about this? And you build on, always use the word and, don't use the word but, okay, yeah, I like that. And, and you build on the ideas. And I just love that creative process.
Makes sense. So you start on one of the biggest books of all time, Spider-Man.
Yeah, right.
Uh, that's no small undertaking. In your mind, who is Spider-Man? What is your ideal Spider-Man? What are the characteristics that the character should have to be, the cat who he is?
The way I always say it is Spider-Man is and always will be Peter Parker, right? Um, Clark Kent is Superman,
Right,
right? That Clark Kent's disguise is Superman is disguised as Clark Kent.
right.
Peter Parker's disguise as Spider-Man, right? I just he's got to go into this heroic mode and everything like that, and he's got to put on a persona that he wasn't necessarily comfortable with at first, Whereas Superman was always Superman, and then he had to take on the guise of Clark Kent to make him something that people didn't know he was. So,
Right. When you were there, Spider-Man became a real juggernaut. I mean, interest grew. The artists that were coming in were catching
yeah,
fire. The writing was
yeah,
great, and pretty soon, every book wanted Spider-Man in it, one way, shape, or
right,
form. What was that
exactly.
experience like being there when this is all building and building?
That was fantastic. But that was, Jim Salicrup was just a wizard on these things. He
Mhm.
was, would constantly come every day. He would come in and go, Glenn, I was in the shower this morning and I was thinking of Spider-Man. I'm like, Jim, you were thinking of Spider-Man in the shower? I'm worried about you, So, but like he would come in and he was always like, he was the one that put all the logos. They were all the, different logos at the time. He put all the same logos on them and everything, because you wanted to say, there shouldn't be different storylines going on and different, if Spider-Man's trapped here in one issue, then how come he's walking free around the streets on the other? He tried to, integrate them as much as possible, and he wanted to have a seamless flow. So people would then, rather than Web of Spider-Man being the third tier Spider-Man, it was a first tier Spider-Man. There was still, hinges of stories. All the writers were now, working together, and we as the editors were telling the writers, okay, this is what's going on over here. So it was really like a puzzle, and that's what's really about the fun about playing in the Marvel universe, right? And playing in the
Mhm.
Marvel sandbox, I like calling it. It's just like, just playing with the different toys and everything, but there's a whole bunch of things that are going on the outside and bringing them in with the Spider-Man universe. It was kind of, bringing it all together. That was sheer genius on Jim's part.
Do you think the character was spread thin though, having three books, and then Todd McFarlane does the Spider-Man book, but
Mm-hmm.
that's a
Yeah,
lot of books, and it's like you said, continuity must have been so tough because each book had its own kind of feel to it, and to try to
right.
put them all together, it must have been quite the challenge.
It was, especially, and then we did one summer. I think it was one summer in a row. It was a two summers and we did a bi-week during the summer, and that was really intense. So, but yeah, it worked because we all spoke, we all communicated to each other. So and we would have these conferences and we talked. So it wasn't Jerry Conway knew what David Michelinie was doing, who knew what Peter Dave was coming in or whatever, that we all knew what each person was working on and everyone knew. And then having us as the editorial hub, they call us, well, how about this? And I would say, Dave would say, well, I want to do this. I say, all right, but Jerry's doing something like that over there, but maybe we can tie into that and do, so I was like, oh yeah, yeah. And it all just kind of worked together.
And you talk, I mean, you just mentioned some names there, but what an all-star team. I
Yeah,
mean, everyone who was involved,
yeah,
from the writers, the inkers, the colorists, and the pencilers, I mean,
yeah.
it was really the cream of the crop all working together.
Absolutely, yeah, and it was really funny too because I was fine with Todd drawing Spider-Man his own way and having the other people draw Spider-Man as the John Romita version of Spider-Man. But Jim was like, no, if we're going to do this whole thing and unify the titles, I want the other. I was afraid that Jim was going to have Todd draw Spider-Man like the John Romita version. Instead, he had the other artists, Alex Saviak and Sal come in and draw their version of Todd's Spider-Man. So it
Right.
all worked out well. Yeah.
What is, or from your experience, the communication between the writer and the artist? Because sometimes, we talk to people and you hear two sides don't really talk. They'll send work
Mhm.
back and forth. And other times it's more of a collaborative effort. They want to bounce ideas off each other. What was your experience like in that?
Oh, I get you. You had to almost bounce in the Spider-Man office. You had to bounce ideas because we were so integrated. So just to make sure that no one was stepping on each other's toes, and then we would bring the artists in there and let them know what was going on, have them, add their 2 cents and everything. I always say, as far as writing goes, what I like to do is what Peter David always did. When he was on the Hulk, I think it was Jeff Purvis at the time, and Peter always tells the story about how he always likes to find out what does the artist like to draw. And so when he was working with Jeff Purvis, Jeff said, "Oh, I like to draw castles." Matt Peter's like, "Huh, I'm writing the Hulk. How am I going to put castles in the Hulk?" And he was doing this whole thing where Joe Fixit was in Las Vegas. So what he decided to do was make the casino that Joe Fixit worked at look like a castle.
Right.
So
Smart thinking. That's what we're
yeah,
doing.
right. So, that's how you work with the art. And I always like, and that's why I like the Marvel method too, and then, you do, just write out the plot and then you let the artist, run with it, right? You have, let them run with what they're doing. Say, okay, on pages, 8 to 12, the characters fight. Just make sure this happens at the end of the fight. Boom. So it's freedom, whereas if you do the full script method, their hands are tied. They don't feel as collaborative as when you use the Marvel method.
You were also very integral in bringing to the talent to the Spider-Man books. What was it that you were looking for in people that you knew, okay, this would be a good fit for what we're doing?
I was looking for something new, something exciting. I was looking, and because Jim was very much a traditionalist, and I think that's why we worked so well together because he maintained that traditionalism. Where I was, the newbie, I just came in, just a college grad, fresh face, and everything like that. And rather than Jim saying, "No, I know it all, you don't know anything," he listened to me. He was like, "No," And so when it was Bobby Chase who was bringing around samples and at the time, because that's when Todd was working on the Hulk, and Bobby was his editor, and she was like showing Todd samples around, and I'm like, "You Todd's leaving the Hulk," and she said, "Yeah." And I was like, "You don't seem too upset." She goes, "Oh, I'm upset, but I want to make sure he lands and does something where his talent will work." And I'm like, all right. And then when Jim came in, and that day, I had these samples for him, and I didn't think that Jim would go for it. I was like, this is so different, But Jim, again, to his credit, was just like, let's do this. This looks good, and we put him on the flagship title, put him on Amazing. He didn't put him on Web, he didn't put him on Spectacular, he put him on the Amazing Spider. I was like, wow. So yeah,
And that sort of leads into my next question is, how do you make a decision to change the creative team on a book? What is it that happens? Do you think sometimes things just run their course or you need new blood in? What is it that would make a decision that, okay, let's make a change to what we're doing here?
yeah, I think there's different editorial philosophies. I always like trying to work with the team that's already there, rather than say, all right, I'm coming in, I'm changing everything. No, I like saying, let's just see what we're doing, and then let's see how well we work with each other. Now I can take this and take it to a different level, and if I have some ideas here and we work well together, it's fine. If that relationship doesn't work out, you give it a few issues and say, okay, now it's time to shake it up a little bit. So we didn't make actually that many dramatic. I think David was already working on Amazing at the
Mm.
time. So, really, we didn't change the writing and all. And I forget who was it Ron Friends who was doing the art at the time? I forget who was doing, but but I think Ron was ready to do something different, or whoever was ready to do something. So it all worked out well. We didn't fire anybody. Nothing was, it just it just kind of was all seamlessly worked together. We made some shifts here and there, but it all seamlessly worked together and it built on itself.
And you were there also because, I mean, Spider-Man sort of led into that comic boom of the
Right.
time.
Yeah.
You
Uh-huh.
start seeing that the landscape was changing, that these books were becoming, more than just the people reading it, they were becoming investments for people and things were really starting to grow.
Yeah, well, I mean, I loved that. I mean, working there at that time was just phenomenal. Just seeing, how everything grew and the amount of investments that were coming in, what we were doing. Our Christmas parties were insane. What was going on? And, it's like, whoa, they started out at the small little shindig at Jim Galton's club downtown, and then they suddenly get these whole things. We're getting ice sculptures and costume characters, and I was like, oh my god, So yeah, we were definitely reaping the benefits and we could see it. But I my philosophy was, well, it's about time that people take these things seriously. I mean, I was always didn't like those articles that say "pow crash comic books grow up." Like, you always have to use the Batman crash pow sound effects things in their headlines, and everyone thinks, oh, we're being cute here. It's like, yeah, no, it's not original.
You also created characters that went into the Marvel universe. For
Mhm.
you, how do you build a character? Is it a name? Is it an ability or a personality characteristics? What's the blueprint for building a character for you?
My because at the time, let's face it, are there any original superpowers? So you really, it's really hard to say, okay, I'm coming up with a new character. I mean, even Deadpool, one of the greatest creations of its time,
Right.
his powers are Wolverine's powers, right? So it's, he doesn't have unique powers. It's just how his personality and, how he uses them, it's like putting Wolverine's powers into a psychotic,
Is
So yeah, I try to do it that way. Like, one of the characters I created was the Blood Wraith in the Avengers, and there was this story that kind of had just been left lying when uh Dane Whitman went to the Avengers, and he had this squire, for lack of a better word, that he left over at Whitman Manor with his winged horse and everything. And I was like, I love the winged horse. I've always been a big fan of Valinor and everything. I was just like, and the black sword, I've always, I was always an Elric fan, always, so I said, but it was never used to what I thought was great. The whole, because a hero having a sword that steals souls, well, that means the hero, can't kill. So Black Knight was always using the flat of the sword. Like, really? Yeah. And Bob finally said, all right, we're going to get rid of the black sword and we're going to instead give him an energy sword. Great, but we had this awesome weapon doing nothing. We had this one character who wasn't doing anything. I merged them together. So what if the squire inherited the sword and became, as one of the greatest foes for the Black Knight? And and so it was a personality thing. The sword corrupted him. He was, when he wasn't in his blood wraith mode, he was, Sean Dolan, and he was still, very, nice person. But when the sword takes him over, there's hell to pay.
most definitely. And when you create a character for Marvel, I know it's an exciting thing, but is it a bit of a double-edged sword? Because it's awesome. Your character's part of the Marvel universe now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That character is also part of the Marvel universe now. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's theirs.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why like I said, I just recently did an interview about Black Wolf. Black Wolf, we did it. It was, Ralph Macchio had these characters that he had come up with, and we were trying to do it because it was just around the same time that Image had launched. So, and what people liked about the Image universe was, like, yes, they are kind of connected, but not. So we wanted to do something that was of the same thing, where it was connected to the Marvel universe, but it wasn't. So, Ralph had this idea of using the deviants, as, who were always the Eternals foe. And we said, hey, let's make let's bring them in, because you figure every race has to have its people who do not believe in what the rest of the race believes in, right? So there had to be some deviants who didn't like what Crow and Gar and all those guys were doing, right? They was like, no, we gotta, we've got our own agenda here. And they became the heroes. They became the rebels, and the rebels of the deviant race. And that was great because people really didn't know on, that was all on the whole Eternal side, right? What's going on over there? They always seem kind of like an offshoot over here. Now this is almost an offshoot of the offshoot. So every once in a while we had to throw something in to remind people, no, this does take place in the Marvel universe.
You had good runs on books, and you had some short runs on books, some
Yeah.
one-offs.
Mm-hmm.
Did you like bouncing from book to book, or would you like to have had like a 2, 3 year run on a book and really make it your own for a while.
I really liked the 2 year run I had on Namor, and I did have other stories. After we rose Atlantis at the end, I had a lot of stories that I was going to follow up on. I always wanted there was a god, a Norse god of the ocean that we've never seen in the Marvel universe, and I always wanted to have Namor go up against him. The Thor of the ocean. I thought, wow, what a battle that would be, right? And
Yeah.
because I was going to have where the gods got pissed off. They always said, what the ocean gods and the sea gods and the water gods are always like, well, we've got more area now to rule over, but we have no one to rule in them.
Right.
So now all of a sudden the land is rises, there's more land area and less. These gods are kind of pissed off, so we're going to have this whole war of the gods going on in the Marvel universe, and I thought it would have been a lot of fun, but never got to do it. So.
I say, I really love your work on Namor. And just a
Thank
question
you.
about Namor is, again, a foundational character. He's from the timely days. Like this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
this is a building block.
yeah.
What is it about the character that he's popular, but
Hmm.
he always needs to sort of be rebooted or co-starred, and he's never
Right.
really grabbed the spotlight like other characters have?
Exactly, because he's always been like more a better of a foe. Like when he was reintroduced in the '60s in the Fantastic Four, he was really more of a foe, but he was a misunderstood foe. He had that whole love thing with Sue Richards going on, everything, and he always wanted, but it was always he wasn't like a badass supervillain of the Fantastic. He was just more like the misunderstood villain of the superhero of the Fantastic Four. So when I took him, because it's funny, Namor was the first character I read at Marvel, right? He was going back to that whole, Tales to Astonish reprint that I read. It was the Hulk and the Submariner. And the front story was the Hulk, but the back story was the Submariner. What was great about that issue that I read was they took place in the same place. I think the Submariner was looking for the Hulk because of the Secret Empire was brainwashed him, was trying to make him go after. So they passed each other a couple times and they never saw each other, but the same scene from a different perspective. I thought that was really cool, but I never really got into Namor, especially the adventures where he was down in Atlantis. And I think that is really the challenge of the character. It's the same thing, it's like what Tom DeFalco he says about Thor. The best Thor stories are the ones that take place on Earth. That's what the people can relate to, when things are going on in Asgard. Yeah, sure, you can have, like a kind of a Lord of the Rings thing going on, but if it's not connected to the Marvel universe at all, it kind of falls by the wayside. So how is it that you bring a character like Namor, he's a king, right? He's a king, his his people are going to get kind of pissed off if he's hanging out, doing superhero stuff on land all the time.
Right.
So having that balance, and I think I struck that pretty well with, how he dealt with Atlantis at the time, how he dealt with his own corporation that John Byrne had started at the time, and then how he dealt with, the repercussions of what Bob Harris had done at that. And I had to bring them all together and kind of resolve all those things.
And you bring up a great point, and I wanted to ask you that because you came in sort of midstream. So
Yeah.
was the edict to you continue what was being done before, or was it, what, this is a new start? Where do you want to go with it?
Yeah, no, there was no edict, which was nice. It was a Mike Rockowitz had just inherited the title, and so yeah, it was a funny story with that. How Mike wanted me to do a pitch for Doctor Strange, and he was editing Doctor Strange. So I said okay. So I went home and I took in everything I could about. And I always loved Doctor Strange, but I just I did all this research on Doctor Strange, did everything, and then I came in with this. I think it was about a week later. I came in with a proposal. I said, Mike, here's a proposal, and he looks at me. He goes, "What's this?" I said, that's the proposal for Doctor Strange. He goes, oh, right. No, I'm not editing Doctor Strange anymore. Yeah, give me something for Namor. I want you to do Namor. I said, okay, great. I'll get you a proposal tomorrow. He goes, no, I need the plot tomorrow.
Well, that's,
And that's why the first plot was I did this rhyme of the ancient submariner because I was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So I needed some time to go. So I did this, future what if kind of story about Namor as the rhyme of the ancient submariner as I did that, so I could do my research research as, because I am a very research oriented person. I wanted to
Right.
know, what, and like you said, he was back in the timely age. So I was like, I had a lot of research to do to get to know the Submariner, because I didn't read his tales in the Tales to Astonish and Marvel superheroes comics that I collected. So I did have them, so I could go back at those and everything. And they also had done a Submariner series where they did a recap of his whole life, like a 4 issue, and the tales. I forget what it was called, but yeah,
Mhm.
that was very helpful. They did a lot of those things, and I worked on that for Spider-Man at the time too. Jim Salicrup had hired me to do the history of the Spider-Man saga.
Mhm.
So again, I'm just very research oriented, so I love that. That's what I loved about doing the Blood Wraith too, with the Black Man. It's like having this character here, going back and saying, oh, what was the Black Sword? What is it? And trying to explore that more. And I got a chance to do that by creating that new character.
How long does it take for you to become comfortable writing to say, you know what, okay, I'm good at what I'm doing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
good at this book. I'm comfortable with where we're going with this.
It's amazing the writing process for the characters. You hear this a lot from writers. The characters start taking over.
Right.
And I start. I'll start writing something with Samara and just have like even I brought the Blood Wraith into the Submariner,
Right.
into Namor. And it's like it wasn't a stretch. It's like, oh, you're just doing that because you created the character and you want to say, like, no, it actually fits because the Black Swords, Namor used the Black Sword to slay Marina.
Right.
Her soul was trapped in the Black Sword. How, she's been there forever. This thing sucks up swords. Marina's soul is still trapped in the Black Sword.
Right.
How are we going to get her out of there? It should happen in a Namor book. And it, so it's perfect, and it's just how these things like they go, oh wow, it kind of touches here, it touches here. The characters actually start writing themselves, and that's what I love about it.
Did you have an endpoint in mind along the way, or were you just going issue by issue, or run by run?
I had, like I said, with the War of the Sea Gods and things, I had, certain story arcs in mind, but I didn't, have, the raising of Atlantis. I had working that, kind of thinking about that for a long time, and then I thought, okay, that'd be a perfect time, when we were, I was told that we had to end the series. I said it's a perfect thing, and then I had to convince, I didn't really have to convince Mark Grunwald. Mark Grunwald was the one they were looking for some big crossover event. I said, what about, we have this landmass that's now, what are we to do with it? I said, that's really a good idea. We should probably do something with the raising of Atlantis. So.
And you also worked besides, writing the comics and editing, but higher up as well. I see here editorial director of Marvel's Custom Publishing. I mean,
Yeah.
there you're moving up the ranks. What was
Mm-hmm.
that like for you? Was it nervousness to move up, or did you feel like this is something I can definitely do?
Oh, I enjoy what I liked about doing that because I wanted to get our characters out there. The hardest thing about being the editorial director of the custom publishing was, every person we worked with, everyone who did the custom, they wanted to use Spider-Man, right? And it's like, oh, we want to do a Spider-Man comic, with for our Adidas sneakers. I'm like, well, that doesn't really make sense. We have this character called Quicksilver. I think you might want to use Quicksilver for your Adidas sneakers or something. We have they had this poster from the Marvel Universe handbooks that they did. It's all and I had that in my office. And when we had clients come in, I said, you can pick any of those characters here. And said, yeah, but everyone knows Spider-Man. I said, yeah, but you don't need Spider-Man for this. You need to try to, or we create new characters, so we'll create a character for you. We'll have, that character can interact with Spider-Man or some other character in this. But we'll use these. Like we had Daredevil was for a comic we did about kerosene. About the safe ways to use kerosene. I said, and the company was like, oh yeah, we want to use Spider-Man. I said, no, I think Daredevil would be really good for that. You can smell the vapors and everything like that. And they loved it. So when the client went with what I was saying, I always loved that. That was great.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, the
Yeah,
fact that you're able to take these characters and like, okay, we can make them a marketing tool as well, and it
exactly.
works for the clients as well. That's pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, exactly. That's what so we had these huge. It's called the Marvel Universe. It's not called
Right.
Spider-Man.
How's it? Well, what was the hardest sell? The hardest sell you ever had to pitch on someone?
Well, the hardest sell for a client to try to
Yeah.
get them to use. Oh my gosh, I don't know. I mean, I remember the hardest sell at Marvel. We did at the time we were doing an AIDS comic book,
Right.
And we that one we had to put the kibosh on because there were a whole bunch of political things going on inside, and that one, pissed off a lot of people, including myself, when we didn't follow that through. So,
Right.
yeah.
You also worked with Wizard as
Hmm.
well.
Yes.
How was that experience? Because, for my generation, before there was Twitter and the internet, you got your hands
It
on
was Wizard.
Wizard
Yep.
and had a
Yeah.
price guide. And, I'll say one thing about Wizard is that a lot of the early interviews with these clients or these artists and writers,
Hmm.
there was not a lot of boundaries put on them. Like Todd McFarlane would openly gripe about things. You would think they would have had someone be like, no, 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 no. But it was a really open dialogue.
Yeah, and that's what I loved about it, right? So there's no BS going on. That's when, at Marvel, using Marvel Age, you wouldn't hear that at Marvel Age, right? Marvel Age was always, pure promo. Even Stan to his, dying day was always go Marvel, just and you never heard any bad words out of his mouth about Marvel or about the people he worked with, but you hear the people, the young upstarts as they were back then, they were shooting at the mouth, and this, yeah, the corporation, they were making us do this, we couldn't do that, I couldn't stick a sword in the Juggernaut's eye, I couldn't. I was like, all right, yeah, sorry you couldn't stick a sword in Juggernaut's eye, because we do have kids who are reading our comics. So, but yeah, so but that was, but then getting the job there, that was great. That was all Jimmy Palmiotti who arranged that, because they were just starting their own new comics imprint, Black Ball, and he wanted, because I had worked with Jimmy before, I was actually one of the people who brought him on. I, hired him to do a lot of the custom comic books, and that was one thing that was also great about custom publishing, is going back to that for a moment, was I could use untried talent, right? Because no one, the people who are going to be reading these comic books, they're not going to be judging the inker, they're not going to be judging the colors, or even the pencilers to a certain extent. I would try new writers on these things. Let me try. So it would be a way for people to break their in. I think Jim Kruger was one of the first things he wrote, was a custom comic book for me. So, that was always a lot of fun, having trying things, and editing their work and working with them and telling them, here's how to do a story, and here's you should not. I'm working with even Jimmy. Jimmy's a fantastic anchor, but I would make some comments, and he'd be like, oh, right, 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 is and he was just phenomenal. So quid pro quo, years later, when I left Marvel, and a few I worked at the Hilderbrand studios for a couple of years, and that was also an amazing experience. But then after that, I worked at Wizard, because Jimmy wanted me there to be what he wanted to be, the editor. But there was a whole bunch of things going on at the time. Everyone had their own say. Garb had his what he wanted to do, and Fred Pierce had what he wanted to do, and so everyone was giving their ideas one. So if you look at those issues, my title is redactor.
Was that tough though? Because you're going from a really well-oiled machine at
Yeah.
Marvel, and
Hmm.
here there's a lot of growing pains, and
Yeah.
everyone has their own thing going on. How did you try to kind of correlate and keep it all together?
Um, just trying to be the semblance of reality there. I was, just making, it's just like, this is what had, don't worry if it looks like it's behind schedule. This is what happened. We'll, but we should schedule a fill in at some point. They would find these, great artists on some of the titles that they wanted to use. And, it's like, and I could tell right away by the level of detail from these artists that this guy is going to need a fill in artist by issue 3. It's just, and sure enough, oh, we want to use this guy. It's like, so it was really funny working with some of the creators, who were working as editors at Wizard, and they would always complain about, the fill-in artists at Marvel, and why was this person doing, well, why couldn't, and then to see it from the other side, yeah, it's not as easy as it looks, is there? Put out a monthly comic book.
And you mentioned you work with the Hildebrand brothers. I mean,
Yeah,
again, talk about top shelf guys.
yeah, yeah.
How was that experience? Because
That was amazing. It was, I
yeah,
mean, I was a fan of them, because I was a big Tolkien fan growing up. So I had all their Tolkien calendars, the Hildebrand calendars, and everything. So when they came into Marvel, one day I was like, whoa, the Hilderbrands are here and everything. And then they had this new technology they wanted to use where they were gonna make uh you could be the superhero, right? And they had this technology where they're gonna, where it was, swap in the person's name throughout, and we had to do that. And so it's like, all right. So, and they wanted it to be, the woman who was, Jean Scrocco. She was the business leader at the time at Unicorn Publishing was called at the time. And what she wanted was going to do, like, make it Spider-Man. I said, well, that doesn't really make sense to have, Glenn Herdling as Spider-Man. Spider-Man is Peter Parker. I said, there's this character we have that, we don't use a lot. Again, this is going back to the whole custom publishing, which I'm glad they went with the idea. I said, called Captain Universe, the hero who could be you. And they were like, oh, and then I show them, it's like, and we created this whole comic, but I just changed the face mask of it. So, rather than the half mask had the full mask. So anyone could be under that mask. And it was great because, we didn't have the technology at the time to change the faces of people. We could only change the names that were in the word balloon today. So, so we did that, but that was a lot of fun. And then we were talking about who to do the cover. I was like, could we get Greg and Tim? And then Gene was like, sure. I was like, oh my God.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And that, I really hit it off with them. And then it came, came time when there was like several rounds of layoffs at Marvel. I had survived like 3 years of layoffs, saw some really good people go, and I just saw the company, what I thought was just, tanking. I saw a lot of the passion there was going away. And so when Gene offered me a job there, I took it. I was like, yeah, no, this is still following my pursuit, my passion here, and just working with these guys will just be an amazing experience. And it was, I had to go into the studio every day and just kind of shoot the shit, and they would be there. They wouldn't break their conversation when they were painting, and they would be, and I was like, wow, they can carry on a full conversation while they're still in paint. It was just amazing. I had some great conversation, and still, Greg is still a dear friend today, and so is Gene. So,
Yeah, well, we had Greg on. It was amazing because they would tag team. Like one would
yeah,
work during the day, the other one
yeah.
would come in at night and do like that. And I'm just like, wow, that's the
But
only.
it actually, and it wasn't even that. I mean, sometimes it was that, sometimes the day night, but sometimes it was, just, if Greg was getting up and, all right, I'm getting a little tired, Tim would then just kind of sit in. So even it wasn't even a matter of timing of the day. It was just like, I need a break from this. I want to do this. They'd switch, or they do, so
Right.
that's really well, and how they could see each other's work and just kind of meld with each other. That was just an amazing process.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
One more Marvel question is: you saw the very highs of Marvel, and as you just
Mhm.
said, you saw the very lows.
Yeah.
Could you
Hmm.
believe for where it was to where it ended when you left that it took such a nosedive over those years?
No, I couldn't believe it. I was really, really upset when, all what was happening was, I had actually, well, what had happened was what we call the suits came in and were running, and everyone there was trying to make, their mark on there and everything. It's like, and even like people who were not creative in that realm would come in and try to be creative, and they just didn't understand, the whole what it meant to be creative. And they could what they couldn't grasp was, well, if you can sell this many comic books every month and you have this hardcore fan base,
Mhm.
then why can't you double your output and have the same amount of people pick that up? And I'm like, and we couldn't, discuss on the editors. We just didn't have that business background to say, there is a point where it's the point of, diminishing returns, right? We didn't know terms like that back then, right? We're like,
Right.
no, we're fans. We that wouldn't work. That's all we could say, right? Well, why won't that work? And they ask you, why wouldn't that work? But we didn't have the business acumen at the time to tell them why. That's one reason I actually went into, shortly after that, I got my master's in publishing at NYU, because I never wanted people at that level to be able to tell me what was right again.
Right. Which leads perfectly into your novelist as well.
Yeah.
Uh, is it how much freedom, let me rephrase all this. Um, to have the freedom to create your own worlds and to
Hmm.
do as you want, how awesome is that for you when you put out these novels?
Well, Oren, it was Piper Houdini actually started
Mhm.
as Duncan Strange.
Okay.
I wanted to give Doctor Strange a nephew
Mhm.
running around his Sanctum Sanctorum. I thought it would just be a lot of fun having this kid running around these magic and getting in all these magic, and that was actually before, because that was one of my original pitches when I told you when Mike Rockowitz was, he asked me for a pitch. One of the pitches was to actually have a younger character. That's when the whole thing with people always like we're having a younger character take over the mantle of the guy. And so I did one of those proposals, right? And I had the younger character, and Jeff Isherwood and I were going to use a character that he had created called Killian, and
Mhm.
we were going to use that character, but that didn't go anywhere. But then when I saw the success of Harry Potter years later, I was like, huh, maybe we can do that story again, but make the character a little bit younger and have the parents. So I, took out the old proposal, blew this, changed the character from Killian to Duncan Strange. I thought that was, kind of a cute name. That would be, just have it, you know. And unfortunately, at the time, I pitched it to Joe Casado, who's editor in chief, and Joe said, Glenn, I love it, it's great, but that's not. We're going someplace different with Doc right now. I said, all right. And then I said, wait a minute, why am I giving all my ideas to Marvel? I think this is a viable, story. And I said, all right, but if I had to do it on my own, how would I do it? And I said, all right, I would need an alternate character, to be that paternal character that Doctor Strange would have been. So when you think of magic, who is the first person you think of in the real world setting?
Right. The Houdini.
Houdini, right? So yeah, so I was like, all right, well, that means I now have to set it in the 1920s. And it's like, and did you know, Oren, they didn't have cell phones in the
I've
1920s?
heard something about that.
Yeah, right. It
That
was
was the
weird. So I
rumor.
was like,
Yeah.
oh, I have to read about this. I have to learn a little bit more about this time. So what I did, I took the New York Times. They had the front page book, I took the 19 from 1926. And I read the front pages of every day of 1926. So if there was actually raining on a day in that story,
Right.
it was really raining on that day in New York. And that, yeah. And so you say, was it easier? Well, I kind of felt I needed those kind of barriers. I needed the barriers that the Marvel universe put on me. I liked having those barriers. Like, okay, you're playing rather than having all the world. I needed something to say, no, you have to be, still caged in here a little bit, and you have to play within these physics and these rules and this playground. So, and that helped me. I had a universe to play with. It was New York, Coney Island in 1926, and so I felt comfortable that way, and it made it for a much better story, I think.
That's awesome. Now, would you say those books are you at your best?
Piper?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think Piper, because what was, again, I was also saying, okay, am I going to do this as a self published comic? And I said, I've always wanted to try my hand at writing a novel. And
Right.
I said, all right. And that's what I went to school for. I majored in English at Bucknell. And I did, so I said, all right, let me try my hand at writing a novel. And I really had fun. I had the whole thing outlined. I used the New York Times, but then I had all these references about Houdini, and then Aleister Crowley is the name. There's a villain in it, and all these other. I always like to say in Piper, there's 2.5 fictional characters. Every other character, even the minor characters, are real characters in that book.
Awesome. Is there a character you never got to work on that you would have
The
loved?
Hulk. The
Okay.
Hulk.
What would your Hulk story be?
I think that the transition from when he went from the Hulk will smash Hulk to the Professor Hulk. I just think there was like, Peter David did it the one time where he grew out of his skin, and then that's when he turned into the Savage Hulk again. I was like, but there was just something there that, I think it could have been brought a little bit more, and I think it was handled very well in the Immortal Hulk. And I read that and I thought it was fantastic. But if I would have done, I would have liked to just spent a little more time. What happens if the Professor Hulk gets pissed?
Right.
Right? He was always in control. He always managed to be under control. What would happen if that character got mad? It's like, so these are the types of things I really would have liked to explore. And I've always liked the Hulk will smash Hulk because that was a Hulk I grew up with. Right? So
Oh, I
it's
like
back to
that.
Sal again. The Sal Buscema, he was like, I remember when he got hit by I think it was Sasquatch or something, and he went all across this field, and the trees are like falling like bowling pins, and then his face is in the dirt, and then suddenly he looks up. He looks up. Now Hulk is really mad. I'm like, yep, I can tell Hulk is really mad.
So, what are some projects you're working on now? What can fans be looking forward to?
I've got a couple of things I can't talk about right now. Then for a license project that I'm working on, and then for what I'm working on, that's creative but not in the creating stories. I'm working on a new app, believe it or not,
Oh,
Oren. Yes, I'm using all my technology background, which is none, and I created an app. So yeah, it's called Hadom, Hadom. It stands for Have a Drink on Me.
wow.
So if you go into a bar that has the technology we're trying right now, we're actually integrating with the Clover POS systems. And if you go into a bar and they have the technology and you have the app, you get a notification, or you just walked into a Hadam bar. Would you like to let your friends know so that they can either A, join you, or B, they can buy you a drink? So you go, oh yeah, I'm gonna let people know I'm here. Boom. It goes out to all your friends who also have the app, and you get, oh, Oren just walked into a Haddon bar. Would you like to buy him a drink? I said, oh, that was really, I really love that interview that Oren did with me. Yeah, I'm gonna buy Oren a drink. So you get a notification, Glenn would like to buy your drink. Would you like to accept? Said, that's really nice of Glenn. Yeah, I'm gonna accept. And then it goes between me and the POS system, and I buy you a drink.
That's a very interesting thing right there.
Thank you.
Boy,
Thank
oh
you.
boy, a man of many talents.
I try. Yeah. And do you know about my hand farts?
I saw that on there, and I was like, I'm trying to figure out, okay, it says you make like popular songs and stuff like that. I'm like,
Yes. Yeah.
that's pretty awesome.
Here we go. We'll do like Yankee Doodle. Ready?
All right. That's the Liberace of hand farts,
There
right?
you go. Yes.
Going to be the best of them all. So
It's actually, there's it's called manualism. I didn't even know that there was a name for the talent. It's called manualism. And because
right.
there's so few people that can do it, I'm actually listed in the Wikipedia article on manualism.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you are top notch right there.
There you go. You see that? Yeah.
If you can do something, be the best at it.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, sir, I just want to, hey, thank you so much for all of you done for us for comic fans.
Sure thing.
The
Yeah.
stories you told, they're absolutely wonderful. And also, thank you for taking the time to speak to me today.
Thanks for speaking with me, Oren. This was fun.
Not a problem.
All
And
right.
I'll put a cut here. But
All right.
yeah, man, this is awesome. Thank you so
All right.
much.
Good.
Yeah, we'd like to, I mean, we'd love to have maybe you and Jim on at some point down the road to talk about you guys' experiences working together.
Yeah, that was fun. It was a fun time. It really
Yeah.
was. Yeah, we'd have a good time doing
And
that.
he's such a nice guy.
Oh yeah, he really is. Yeah.
You know, I see him at Terrificon and he sells for $5 these sketches he does of random things. I'm like, you know
Yeah,
what?
right.
Why not? If you got
Yeah.
nothing else to
What
do.
I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go to New York Comic Con this year,
Okay.
and because I'm cleaning out my attic and I have all these comic books that I've written. I'm like, what am I ever gonna need with these comic books, right? So what I've done, I've gathered every, one issue of everything I've written into a binder, and I have Jeff Isherwood is doing a cover for the binders. So I thought, then I'm gonna get Paul Mounts to color it, but I said, that way all my stories are collected in these binders, but then I have all these other multiple copies and everything. So what I'm gonna do is take it to New York Comic Con and then have a thing there. You over 21? Do you have an iPhone? Ask how you can get a free comic or novel signed by Glenn Herdling. And what I do is have them download the Hadam app.
Right.
Is download the app and I'll sign I'll give them a comic book and sign it. Here you go.
That's very good. And
Yeah.
for my money, Glenn Isherwood, so criminally underrated.
Oh, Jeff. Yeah. Yeah. He's yeah.
Jeff, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Such a
He's
cool
yeah.
dude.
I've always said that. I said, oh my God, he was. Yeah. He was. I was so. I would get his pages. I'd be like, this is so awesome. How come he's not? And the thing is, and he's on time. He's
Right.
timely too. It's like, oh my God, yes.
And we are back. What a nice guy. I mean, I really had fun on that conversation. I'm sure there's many, many more stories he could tell. Again, I always say about everyone, but I really mean this so much too with Glenn because uh, he's just so fun to talk to. I want to hear all about the other projects he worked on with Marvel, more stuff with Wizard. And that's pretty cool with his hands that he could do all that. I didn't know that was an official thing, but it is an official thing. I think he's even in Wikipedia mentioned as one of the top manualists in America. So congratulations, Glenn, on that. And congratulations to you for sitting through and listening to us and supporting us and being a fan of ours. We thank you so much. Remember, rate, review, subscribe. Head over to T Public. We have all sorts of cool designs up there by our buddy Sean McMillan. Just type in Donovan Bandits. And the contest continues. If you put a review on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform that we're on, you might be chosen to win a big stack of awesome comics from Mike Farrah's personal collection. That's right, folks. Mike Farrah touched these. He read them. You could tell your friends, tell your neighbors. If you sell your house, you can say, I had Mike Farrah own comics in my house. That's going to kick up the market value 100%. When you get it graded, tell him Mike Farrah touched it. That's going to put it to a 10.0, the rare 10.0, just because of Mike. So please leave a nice review for us. We love you guys. Please, it helps us out a lot too. So have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next week with more exciting episodes.